What is a beta particle?
Beta particles are another type of particle that can be emitted during a nuclear decay process. A beta particle can be either an electron or a positron, which is the antiparticle of an electron. If it is an electron being emitted, one of the neutrons in the nucleus must become a proton to conserve charge in the process. Beta decay increases the number of protons in the nucleus by 1 and leaves the atomic mass essentially unchanged.
What makes a fabric waterproof?
One type of waterproof fabric is waterproof simply because the threads are woven so tightly that water cannot easily get inside or through. Other waterproof materials are waterproof because they have been treated with a rubber or some other coating that keeps water out. Some coatings will only temporarily waterproof a material such that the coating or treatment wears away over time and needs to be reapplied.
What is the octet rule?
A rule for chemical bonding that says atoms prefer to have 8 electrons in their valence shell.
What is emulsion?
Non-superimposable mirror images.
When I get an MRI, what is the machine actually measuring?
An MRI is basically just performing an NMR measurement on the hydrogen atoms in your body. Similar to an NMR instrument, an MRI instrument uses a large magnet and a radio frequency pulse to generate a rotating net magnetization in the hydrogen atoms in your body. The resulting magnetization generates an electric current in a receiver in the MRI instrument that can be processed to generate an image of what's going on inside your body.
How is inorganic chemistry relevant to biological chemistry?
Because metals are important to many biological processes. In the active sites of enzymes, see biochemistry, where the important chemical reactions take place. Metal centers are frequently crucial to the catalytic bond-forming and bond-breaking events. Metals are also important for maintaining gradients in ion concentrations, allowing muscles to move, and a variety of other biological processes. Bioinorganic chemistry is thus a huge field. And these two topics are often taught in conjunction with one another.
What is fission?
A nuclear reaction in which a nucleus splits into smaller parts.
What is titration?
The process of measuring the concentration of an analyte by reacting a second solution of known concentration to cause a reaction.
What is the meniscus?
A phase boundary, which is curved due to surface tension.
What is a superalloy?
Superalloys are alloys that display a particularly excellent ability to resist deformation under stress at high temperatures, along with good resistance to corrosion and great surface stability. Most often, a superalloy involves nickel, cobalt, or nickel iron as the base alloying element. Superalloys have been used primarily in turbines and in the aerospace industry.
What is an isotope?
Atoms of the same element, same number of protons, with different number of neutrons.
What is molecular weight distribution?
We just talked about the fact that polymers can have different molecular weights. Oftentimes in reactions that make polymers, a range of molecular weights are produced. The molecules may be composed of the same repeating unit, monomer. But for a number of reasons the chains are different in length. It turns out that this distribution of lengths is important to a number of polymer properties. The details of how this number is calculated are not worth going into. It's sufficient to know that a higher molecular weight distribution means that there is a larger spread of polymer chain lengths. A distribution of 1.0 would mean that every single polymer chain has the exact same molecular weight.
How are transition metals important for nitrogen fixation?
Nitrogen fixation is the term for a process that converts diatomic nitrogen gas N2 in the atmosphere into ammonia, NH3. This is a very important biological process because it converts N2, which is very unreactive, into a form that can more readily be incorporated into amino acids and other molecules. Transition metals, such as vanadium or molybdenum, are found in the active sites of the enzymes that carry out this important reaction.
What is radioastronomy?
Radio astronomers study what's going on in outer space by using radio waves. As opposed to telescopes, which use light in the visible region of the spectrum. This approach has some distinct advantages, perhaps the most obvious being that radio astronomers can work at any time of the day, while astronomers who rely on light telescopes can only work at night. Radio astronomy relies on monitoring weak radio wave signals coming in from outer space, and knowing how to interpret these signals to draw conclusions about the locations of celestial bodies and events that have taken place far, far away.
What is Saran, RAP?
Saran, RAP is a trade name, another held by the Dow Chemical Company, for polyvinylidene chloride. If two of the hydrogen atoms on every other carbon in polyethylene are replaced by chlorine atoms. Note yet again that this is not how this material is actually made. You get PVDC, or polyvinylidene chloride. It was discovered by accident in 1933 by Ralph Wiley, who was having trouble washing this strange material out of the bottom of a piece of glassware. The actual polymer they were trying to make was polyperchloroethylene, where every hydrogen is replaced by a chlorine atom. It was just before World War II that a breakthrough was made that allowed the scientists to make film from this new material. It was quickly adopted by the Army to wrap equipment being transported by sea in order to prevent corrosion from salt water and other applications to keep soldiers dry in jungle environments. After World War II, Dow found a new use for the material and introduced a PVDC film product for wrapping food called Saran, RAP. The clingy food wrap you buy today is not PVDC, however. This material was phased out due to environmental and health concerns of those chlorine atoms, and low-density polyethylene took its place. Okay, but why was PVDC ever called Saran, RAP? Many industrial trade names have no interesting story behind the creation. Saran, RAP is an exception. You might think that Ralph Wiley was responsible for naming this material, having discovered it? Nope. Ralph Wiley's boss, John Riley, named the material after his wife and daughter Sarah and Ann.
What is the activation energy?
Difference in energy between the reactants and transition state, or activated complete, for a chemical reaction or process.
Why did Robert S. Mulliken, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his fundamental work concerning chemical bonds and the electronic structure of molecules by the molecular orbital method. Mulliken received the Nobel Prize in recognition of his work studying that nature of how electrons behaving in molecules. In particular for the molecular orbital approach that he developed. Molecular orbitals are formed by the overlap of the orbitals on individual atoms. And these can be used to rationalize whether bonds will exist between pairs of atoms. How strongly the pairs will be bonded, and what type of reactivity the molecule may be expected to undergo.
What is materials science?
Materials science is a field at the intersection of the basic sciences and engineering with a focus on the relationship between the microscopic, atomic or molecular, structure of a material and its macroscopic properties. Many techniques relevant to chemistry are used to characterize materials, and the descriptions of the underlying microscopic structure of the material are discussed with regard to solid-state chemistry. Thus many components of materials science represent applications of chemistry. In this section we will provide a brief introduction to materials science, with a focus on some of the topics that are more relevant to chemistry.
How can I make a lava lamp at home?
Note, okay, so we'll disclose up front that this experiment won't actually make a lamp. It will make a device with bubbles that rise and fall just like a lava lamp. But you'll need a flashlight or other light source if you want it to be illuminated. Chemistry principles encountered in this experiment: chemical reactions, density, miscibility, gases, materials you'll need. Vegetable oil, 20 ounces. Plastic soda bottle, 20 ounces or 1 liter, water, 1 tablespoon. Alka-Seltzer, R, food coloring. The procedure: begin by filling the plastic bottle almost full with vegetable oil. Add a few drops of food coloring to 1 tablespoon of water. And then add this to the plastic bottle's contents. You'll notice that the oil and water are not miscible, which is what will allow us to make bubbles within the oil. The water sinks to the bottom of the bottle, since it is more dense than the oil. Ground up an Alka-Seltzer, R, tablet and add the pieces/powder to the bottle, and then seal the cap. When the chemicals in the table dissolve and react, carbon dioxide gas bubbles will be formed, see equation below, which will lower the overall density of the water bubbles, allowing them to rise to the top of the bottle. When they reach the top, they will leave the water bubbles and join the small amount of air at the top of the bottle. At this point, the water bubbles will again be denser than the oil, so they will sink back to the bottom of the bottle. This process will repeat until all of the Alka-Seltzer, R, has been reacted. You should see colored bubbles move throughout the bottle, similar to a lava lamp.
What is a free energy diagram for a chemical reaction?
A free energy diagram is probably easiest to understand by taking a look at one. See diagram, as we explain the key features. The y-axis measures the relative free energy of the chemical species we're dealing with, while the x-axis describes the reaction coordinate. It's common that going left to right is forward progress in the reaction. But this isn't necessarily the case 100% of the time. On the left we have our reactants. In general there may be any number of reactants, and here we've just denoted two species, A and B. The hill in the middle is the energetic barrier to the chemical reaction, and the quantity EA denotes the height of this energy barrier. The quantity EA is commonly referred to as the activation energy for the reaction. On the right-hand side of the diagram we have our products. Again, there can be any number of products, and here we've denoted them C and D. Finally we have the quantity G, which describes the change in Gibbs free energy associated with the reaction. The fact that the reactants are higher in free energy than the products tells us that this particular example is a spontaneous reaction. If the reactants were lower in free energy than the products, the reaction would not be spontaneous.
What is molality?
A measure of concentration defined as moles of solute per kilogram of solvent.
What is PET? Polyethylene terephthalate.
Polyethylene terephthalate is a thermoplastic that is used in both textiles, where it's called polyester, and in bottling, where the same polymer is called PET. PET is an alternating polymer of ethylene and terephthalate monomers. This material is really good at preventing gases from diffusing through it. So it's great for keeping carbonated drinks fizzy.
Why did Paul Berg, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his fundamental studies of the biochemistry of nucleic acids, with particular regard to recombinant DNA, and Walter Gilbert, United States, and Frederick Sanger, United Kingdom, for their contributions concerning the determination of base sequences in nucleic acids. Berg earned the prize for having been the first to design a recombinant DNA molecule, which is to say he constructed a DNA molecule containing parts of DNA from different species. Gilbert and Sanger shared the other half of the award for their work toward the sequencing of DNA. The sequencing of DNA was initially an extremely time-consuming and expensive task. But today it is becoming more and more feasible to sequence DNA efficiently and affordably.
What is a unit cell?
the smallest group of atoms, in a crystal, required to represent the symmetry and overall three-dimensional structure of the crystal.
How many different conformations can a protein adopt?
A lot. For a typical protein consisting of 100 amino acids, there are approximately 3,198 possible conformational states. This leads to something called Levinthal's paradox, which has to do with how a protein goes about sampling each of these possible states. If a protein just randomly went through each of 3,198 possible states, it would, on average, take longer than the age of the universe to get through all of them. Fortunately, proteins don't sample each of the possible conformations randomly. Instead, the gradient, or slope, of the energy along the folding pathway, along with the formation of local interactions between the amino acids, guides the protein toward states of lower energy. This allows it to avoid sampling most of the unimportant conformations as it folds toward its native state.
What chemicals are commonly found in mosquito repellent?
A chemical known as N,N-diethylmethyluamide, more commonly known as DEET, is the most commonly used insect/mosquito repellent. This chemical can be applied directly to the skin to prevent mosquito and other bug bites. It is believed to work because mosquitoes dislike the smell of DEET, so they try to stay away from it. In some cases, DEET can be an irritant and, in very rare cases, it has been associated with more serious health problems such as seizures.
Why did Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin, United Kingdom, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For her determinations by X-ray techniques of the structures of important biochemical substances. Hodgkin used X-ray crystallography to determine the structure of penicillin, vitamin B12, and a large number of other biologically relevant molecules. As the importance of computers for processing X-ray crystallographic data was increasingly being recognized, Hodgkin was noted for her exceptional ability to process the data, and the Nobel Committee recognized that this talent likely played a vital role in her ability to achieve so much during her career.
Where does coal come from?
Coal is formed from trees and plants that died hundreds of millions of years ago. The dead plant material eventually became buried deep underground, which placed a large amount of pressure on it. Over time, the plant material became compressed and hardened, eventually forming coal. while this resource can be replaced over very long periods of time. We use it much faster than it can ever be regenerated.
What is a biosignature?
A biosignature is a chemical signature that can be observed from a distance that signals the presence of living organisms. These could include complex chemical structures associated with life forms or accumulated quantities of biomass or waste.
Do you notice a change in the part that you dipped into the solution?
Place the remaining pennies into the solution. You will likely notice a visible reaction as the pennies are placed in the solution. The reason pennies eventually begin to appear dull is that the copper surface reacts with oxygen in the air to create a layer of copper oxide. In this experiment, the vinegar and salt will react with the copper oxide and remove it, which will leave a layer of the original shiny copper exposed on the surface. Allow the pennies to remain in the solution for several minutes. If necessary, try to move the coins around so as to expose both sides of each coin to the solution. If possible, flip the coins over after a couple of minutes. Drain the solution and rinse the coins with clean water. They should now look clean and shiny.
What is aqua regia and what is it used for?
Aqua regia translates to royal water in Latin, and it consists of a mixture of concentrated nitric and hydrochloric acids, typically in a 1:3 ratio, respectively. Since these are both strong acids, aqua regia can be quite dangerous and must be handled with extreme caution. This mixture is capable of dissolving several types of metals and has found many applications in chemistry, including the refinement of very high purity gold.
Why do some prescription pills come in such elaborate colors/capsules?
There's no chemical reason for this. Sometimes pills are colored for branding purposes. Pepto-Bismol, R, is pink. Viagra, R, is blue. Cymbalta, R, is green, and you recognize those colors. It can also help people keep track of which pill is which, and also to remember which ones to take.
What does a preservative do?
Preservatives keep food fresh by slowing the growth of mold and bacteria. Antimicrobial preservatives, preventing oxidation, antioxidants, or slowing enzymes from continuing the ripening process after a fruit or vegetable was picked or cut.
What is matter?
Any substance that has mass.
Why did Gerhard Ertl, Germany, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For his studies of chemical processes on solid surfaces. Surface chemistry is a topic of broad importance to many applied areas of chemistry. These include atmospheric chemistry, as some atmospherically relevant reactions take place at the surface of ice crystals, semiconductors, and solar energy capture, to name a few. Ertl was one of the founding fathers of modern surface science, and he played a role in developing many of the techniques used to study surfaces today. The study of well-characterized surfaces typically requires studies to be carried out under ultra-high vacuum conditions so as to avoid contamination of the surface. To be studied by any gas phase molecules that may tend to adsorb onto the surface.
How is the frequency of electromagnetic radiation related to its energy?
The frequency of a photon is related to its energy, E, by a pretty straightforward equation. E equals h. In this equation, h is Planck's constant, which has a value of 6.626 x 10 to 34 Js. The frequency term is the frequency of the radiation in Hertz, as we can see from this equation. Electromagnetic radiation with higher frequency has higher energy associated with it. When a photon's energy matches the energy spacing between two energy levels in an atom or molecule, it can cause a transition between these energy levels. This results in absorption of the photon, which transfers its energy to the atom or molecule. For example, the energy spacing between the ground and first excited electronic states of a hydrogen atom is 1.64 x 10 to 18 J, which corresponds to a photon frequency of 2.47 x 1015 Hz. So photons with this frequency can excite the electron in a hydrogen atom from the ground to first excited electronic state.
What is LDPE, low-density polyethylene?
If the density of a polyethylene is between 0.91 to 0.94 G/cm3, yes, there's a little overlap in these ranges, it's called low-density polyethylene. To get to this density, the polyethylene chains have more branching than in HDPE, but still only a few percent of the atoms along an entire chain. These branches prevent the chains from stacking together quite as well, which makes the material softer and more flexible. With those properties, LDPE finds use as trash, grocery, and sandwich bags. And that clingy food wrap, although the original Saran wrap was not LDPE, see below.
What are MRI contrast agents and what are they used for in medicine?
Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, see the modern chemical lab. Contrast agents are used to make tissues and other structures inside the body easier to view in an MRI scan. Many of these contrast agents are based on gadolinium with various ligands attached. The contrast agents are injected or ingested into the body, and they function by changing the relaxation time of the atoms observed in an MRI scan. The overall result is that these complexes improve the ability of MRI to see what is going on in your body.
What is fusion and how might it be used as an energy source?
We looked at fusion in nuclear chemistry. To recap, fusion involves the combination of two nuclei to form a single nucleus. For lightweight nuclei, this process typically involves the release of energy. Unfortunately, it's currently very difficult to make fusion happen under practical conditions. Nuclei typically have to be accelerated to very, very high speeds to make fusion take place.
Why did Herbert A. Hauptmann and Jerome Karl, both United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For their outstanding achievements in developing direct methods for the determination of crystal structures. These two men won the prize for developing improved methods of analyzing crystal structure diffraction patterns to yield molecular structures. Their method was based on developing probabilistic equations relating the chemical structure to the observed diffraction patterns, and it relied on measuring many diffraction patterns to determine the molecular structure.
What is a transition metal?
Typically, this refers to any element in the D block, groups 3 through 12, of the periodic table.
What makes carbon monoxide dangerous?
When carbon monoxide is inhaled, it is readily absorbed through the lungs and into the bloodstream where it binds to the phase center in hemoglobin. See also biochemistry. Unfortunately, hemoglobin binds to carbon monoxide much more strongly than it does to oxygen. So carbon monoxide rapidly interferes with the ability of hemoglobin to deliver oxygen throughout your body. If this happens, then your muscles and your brain will begin to run out of oxygen. Similar to what happens when a person is drowning. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas, which makes it difficult to detect unless you have a carbon monoxide detector around. Carbon monoxide levels of 100 parts per million or higher can be hazardous or fatal to humans. Poisoning from carbon monoxide can result in brain damage. Damage to the endocrine system, to the nervous system, and to the heart and other organs. It represents the leading cause of accidental poisoning-related death and poisoning-related injury globally. We should mention that even if a person survives carbon monoxide poisoning, there may be long-lasting effects. Early symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning can include headaches or nausea. And the treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning typically involves having a person breathe 100% O2, recall that air only contains Ca. 20% O2, so that O2 can more competitively bind hemoglobin to replace carbon monoxide.
When did alchemists finally abandon trying to make gold?
In the late 1700s, a scientist named James Price was still hard at work trying to transmute metals into gold and silver. In 1782, he claimed he could convert mercury into silver and gold. At first it appeared that his experiments had worked, but conflict rapidly rose. More and more scientists asked to witness the experiments firsthand. And Price eventually lost confidence in the validity of his own work. After disappearing for a few months, in 1783 he invited scientists to his laboratory to witness his experiments in person, but only a few men showed up. In their presence, Price intentionally ingested a poison, killing himself. He was the last of the modern scientists to claim to have achieved the goals of alchemy. And it is no longer believed that anyone will find a simple way to convert inexpensive metals into gold.
What is polymorph?
One of the crystalline forms of a substance that can crystallize in multiple forms.
Can sound move through a vacuum?
No. Sound is a mechanical wave, which means that for the wave to move, actual molecules must bump into one another. In a vacuum, there is no matter, so in space, no one can hear you scream.
What is a glass?
An amorphous solid material.
What is an atomic number?
Number of protons in an atom.
What is a syndiotactic polymer?
A polymer in which substituents are located on alternating sides of the backbone.
Has any legislation been passed regarding the implementation of green chemistry?
Also yes. A couple of examples are the registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. REACH program in Europe and the California Green Chemistry Initiative in California in the United States. The purpose of the REACH program is to require that companies make data available that demonstrates the safety of their products. This includes the potential chemical hazards during the use of a product. And it also describes means of restricting the use of specific chemicals. A similar piece of legislation, the Toxic Substances Control Act, exists in the United States, but this has received criticism for being far less effective. The California Green Chemistry Initiative was approved in 2008. Requiring the California Department of Toxic Substances Control to place priority on specific chemicals of concern.
What is an alkali earth metal?
Group 2 of the periodic table, i.e. B, Mg, Ca, Senior, Ba, Ra.
How does crystallization purify compounds?
Crystallization as a purification technique relies on the fact that it is usually much easier to form a crystal from a single chemical species than it is to form a crystal from a mixture of chemical compounds. Recrystallization is the process of dissolving a crude, impure product in a hot solvent or mixture of solvents, and allowing it to crystallize out of the solution form as the solvent cools. Once a small crystal, even one so small we can't see it, begins to form, it is relatively easy for other molecules of the same compound to add to the crystal. Other compounds will not be able to readily add to this crystal, which results in the formation of a crystal containing a single, pure chemical compound.
What is a dielectric constant?
The dielectric constant of a material characterizes the extent to which it insulates against the flow of charge or against the effects of an electric field. Materials with a high dielectric constant screen the effects of charges within the material, while materials with a low dielectric constant allow the effects of a charge to be felt more strongly. In solutions containing ions, the dielectric constant of the solution will determine the extent to which the other molecules in the solution feel the effects of the charges present. The lowest possible dielectric constant exists in a vacuum in which there is no material present to screen the charge of a field.
What do the different octane ratings mean at the gas pump?
The octane number provides a measure of the amount of compression a fuel can undergo before it combusts. The name octane rating comes from the fact that isooctane is used as the standard against which a fuel's compression characteristics are measured. A fuel with an octane rating of 89 means that it has the same ability to withstand compression as a mixture of 89% isooctane and 11% heptane. In reality, gasoline contains many other components. Fuels with higher octane ratings are typically used in higher performance automobiles. Since fuels may be able to withstand compression better than isooctane, it's entirely possible to achieve octane ratings of over 100.
So is there a tannin taste bud?
No one knows yet.
In what professions is knowledge of biochemistry important?
Biochemistry is important for people interested in careers in human medicine, veterinary medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, and food science, as well as research in almost any physical or biological science and many subfields of engineering as well. While this list isn't all-inclusive, you can see that biochemistry is used by people working in many different areas.
How does a nuclear reactor generate energy?
Nuclear power comes from the energy released in fission processes, like the ones we discussed in nuclear chemistry. The nuclear reactors used for commercial energy production make use of controlled chain reactions of uranium-235. Upon colliding with a neutron, uranium-235 decays spontaneously into two lighter atoms, releasing energy for each atom of uranium that is split. The amount of energy released in the fission process is very large compared to that released from the combustion reactions that we use to obtain energy from fossil fuels. The result is that we can get a lot of energy from a relatively small amount of uranium. In fact, a kilogram of enriched uranium can generate about the same amount of energy as 8 million liters of gasoline.
What is an electrochemical cell?
One common example of a redox reaction in electrochemistry involves the transfer of electrons from zinc Zn, metal to copper, Cu, ions in an electrochemical cell. Zinc, Zn, gives up electrons more readily than copper, Cu. So electrons spontaneously transfer from the Zn metal to the Cu metal, depositing Zn2 plus ions into the solution and causing Cu metal to come out of the solution and onto the solid. This process releases energy, which can be used to drive external processes, such as powering a light bulb, for example.
How are isotopes made?
Specific isotopes of an element can be obtained in one of two ways. Either by separation of the desired isotope from a naturally occurring sample or by synthesis of the desired isotope. Since the different isotopes of an element all have the same chemical properties, they can be quite difficult to separate. The separation techniques used to separate different isotopes are thus based on their differences in mass, rather than on differences in chemical properties. Some of the methods used include separation by diffusion in the gas or liquid phases, centrifugation, ionization, and mass spectrometry, or chemical methods based on differences in reaction rates due to different atomic masses. Different isotopes of an element can also be generated synthetically. One way to do this is to fire high-energy particles at the nucleus of an atom. Depending on the situation, this can either cause a particle to be emitted from the parent nucleus, generating a lighter nucleus, or the fired particle can be absorbed, generating a heavier nucleus. It is also possible to synthesize isotopes of some elements by making use of another naturally occurring nuclear reaction, such as when the particles released by one nuclear fission reaction are absorbed by another nucleus.
How are glucose levels regulated?
In humans, the amount of glucose in the blood at any given time is regulated very carefully. If your blood glucose level is too high, your body releases a chemical called insulin into the bloodstream, signaling that it's time to convert some of the extra glucose floating around into glycogen. Similarly, if your blood glucose level gets too low, your body releases a chemical called glucagon into the bloodstream, telling your body to start breaking down that glycogen to release more glucose into the blood.
What is the freezing point?
Temperature at which liquid and solid phases coexist in equilibrium.
Why do shrimp change color when they're cooked?
Some, but not all shrimp, are grayish when they are raw, but turn pink once they're cooked. It makes sense to guess that this is because some chemical compound with a red color is being produced once you add heat. What's actually happening, though, is that the more intense pigments in the shrimp's shell are decomposing with heat. while the compound responsible for the red color is more stable. That red molecule is called astaxanthin. And it's not only found in shrimp shells but is also the reason that salmon meat is red. You'll probably be interested to know that there are a good number of chemistry experiments that you can perform right in your own home. While we can't teach every principle in this book with experiments that you can do with household items, we will do our best to illustrate some of the basic principles. Mostly those relevant to basic chemistry lab work, with items you may already have in your kitchen.
How do molecules interact?
The forces molecules exert on each other fall into a few main categories. Van der Waals interactions. Van der Waals interactions are the broadest group of intermolecular interactions. This includes basically all attractive and repulsive forces that don't involve ions. Charged atoms or molecules, or the rather unique situation of hydrogen bonding. Van der Waals interactions include forces due to the dipole moments of polar molecules, as well as interactions due to induced dipoles that can form even in nonpolar molecules. Ionic interactions. Another class of intermolecular attractions involves attractive and repulsive forces between pairs of ions, or between ions and neutrally charged atoms or molecules. These interactions are typically stronger than those in the van der Waals category. Interactions between pairs of ions are governed by Coulomb's law, while interactions between ions and neutral molecules are either ion dipole or ion-induced dipole interactions. Hydrogen bonding. A hydrogen bond is a strong interaction between a hydrogen atom and another electronegative atom, usually fluorine, oxygen, or nitrogen, that are not covalently bonded to one another. The hydrogen atom also must typically be bonded to an electronegative atom, usually oxygen or nitrogen. The origin of this strong attractive interaction is that a hydrogen atom bonded to an electronegative atom has a partial positive charge due to its lack of electron density. This allows the hydrogen atom to have a strong attractive interaction with electronegative atoms, or ions, which have partial negative charges due to their extra electron density.
What is a vacuum?
A vacuum is space without matter. The word vacuum derives from a Latin word that means empty. A perfect vacuum, or one with absolutely no matter in a given space, is very hard to achieve, but through modern engineering scientists can get pretty close without having to go into deep space to run their experiments.
So why are you sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner?
It's not the turkey, but the extra servings of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, or sugars, cause your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin helps the body deal with the huge amount of sugar and amino acids you just consumed. But interestingly, it has no effect on tryptophan. So other amino acids are taken out of the bloodstream. And tryptophan is free to use the transporters to get into your brain, making you sleepy.
What is a colloid?
Suspension of particles of one substance in another, e.g., milk.
What is a glove box and what is its purpose?
A glove box is a method of carrying out chemical reactions under an inert atmosphere. It basically consists of a large box that has had the air removed and replaced with an inert gas, like pure nitrogen or argon. One side of the box is typically made of a clear, hard, transparent plastic, which has openings covered by large rubber gloves, into which a researcher can insert their arms. This allows a researcher to manipulate items inside the inert atmosphere of the glove box without letting any air inside. To move items in or out of the box, a purgeable antechamber is attached to one side of the box. While it is certainly not as easy to manipulate items inside a glove box as it is to manipulate items outside the box, a glove box provides one of the most straightforward approaches to carrying out chemistry in an air-free environment.
What do the chemical structures of vitamin molecules look like?
Above are the structures of some common vitamin molecules. They typically have a molecular weight in the neighborhood of 100-1500 g/mol.
What molecular properties lead to lower melting points?
Most of the trends we talked about for raising boiling points hold true for melting points for most of the same reasons. There is one major exception, though. The more branched, and therefore compact, a molecule is, the higher its melting point. Because, in general, compact molecules will pack better in a crystal lattice. The better packed a lattice is, the more stable it is, and the more heat energy it takes to break up that lattice and melt the solid.
What fraction of power globally comes from renewable energy sources?
It is estimated that about 16% of global energy consumption currently comes from renewable resources. Hopefully this number will increase significantly in the near future.
What is DDT?
DDT, or dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, is a substance that was widely used as an insecticide until its harmful effects on human health and on wildlife became known. DDT was essentially poisoning the humans and wildlife who came into contact with it. In the context of the advent of green chemistry, DDT carries a special significance in that it helped to awaken the public to the fact that the indiscriminate use of chemicals was causing harm to the environment. News of the harmful effects of DDT was spread by Rachel Carson's 1962 book, Silent Spring, which explained the numerous negative environmental effects of spraying DDT on crops. Knowledge of the harmful effects of DDT helped to awaken the public to the idea that releasing large amounts of relatively untested chemicals into the environment was potentially causing damage to humans and wildlife. DDT was officially banned in the US in 1972.
What is the critical point?
A set of conditions at which no boundary exists between two phases of a substance.
Why did Sidney Altman, Canada, United States, and Thomas Sek, United States, win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry?
For their discovery of catalytic properties of RNA. While RNA was already known for its role as a molecule involved in heredity and the transport of genetic information, Altman and Sek discovered that RNA can also serve biocatalytic functions. This was a completely surprising result to the scientific community. The discovery was made when RNA was put into a test tube in the absence of any protein enzymes, and the RNA began to cut itself into pieces and rejoin the pieces back together again. This observation led to the discovery of the first RNA enzymes. By the time the prize was awarded, nearly 100 RNA enzymes had already been discovered.
What is crude oil?
Crude oil is the oil that is found underground in natural reserves. It is formed from the natural decay of living things that were in the sea millions of years ago, which is why it's commonly called a fossil fuel. The key ingredient that makes oil a valuable energy source is hydrocarbons. As we discussed briefly in chemical reactions, hydrocarbons release substantial amounts of energy when they undergo combustion reactions.
What is a de Broglie wavelength?
Also known as matter wavelength. Inversely proportional to the momentum of the object or particle, see also wave-particle duality.
What is an isothermal process?
An isothermal process is a process in which the temperature remains constant throughout the process.
What is message, and is it really so bad to consume?
Message stands for monosodium glutamate. It is a natural, but non-essential amino acid. It is used by food manufacturers as a flavor enhancer, and by itself has the taste of umami, the fifth taste sensation we mentioned in macroscopic properties, the world we see. There have been countless studies on its safety to eat, and the data overwhelmingly supports message as being safe to consume even in absurdly large quantities. But don't try to disprove those studies. Everything in moderation. Your mother was right about that.
How does Viagra work?
Viagra, sildenafil, interferes with an enzyme located in the erectile tissue that breaks down a molecule called cGMP, cyclic guanosine monophosphate. Viagra, slows down this enzyme, allowing the amount of cGMP to build up. cGMP is responsible for a process known as vasodilation, or widening of the blood vessels in smooth muscle cells. More blood in these vessels means a stronger erection.
What is quantitative analysis?
Analysis of the specific amounts of the constituent species present in a sample.
Is DNA a polymer?
It is. DNA contains two long polymers of sugars, called nucleotides. Attached to each sugar molecule are phosphate groups and a nitrogen base, technically a nucleobase. The sequence of these nucleobases encodes the information in DNA. For more on DNA, see the biochemistry chapter.
What is an example of how to green a chemical process?
At the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, the synthesis of Viagra, see the world around us, originally had an E factor of 105. However, even before Viagra, was made available to the public, a team of researchers at Pfizer re-examined the entire synthesis step by step. Relatively toxic chlorinated solvents were replaced with less toxic alternatives. The synthesis was also modified to recycle the solvents wherever possible. The use of hydrogen peroxide, which carries some associated health hazards, was removed from the process. Another reagent, oxalyl chloride, is also no longer used. Use of this reagent results in the production of carbon monoxide, which is now avoided. In the end, the E factor for synthesis of Viagra, R, was reduced to only 8, an over 13-fold reduction. Subsequently, similar changes were made to processes throughout Pfizer. The E factor for Lyrica, R, an anticonvulsant drug, was similarly reduced from an initial value of 86 to now only 9. These sorts of improvements are eliminating millions of tons of chemical waste, while in most cases simultaneously lowering production costs, making safer work conditions, and making products safer for consumers.
What is a polar?
A compound in which the charge distribution leads to an overall dipole moment.
What is a crystal lattice?
Crystalline solids have regular, repeating arrangements of atoms or molecules. In order to classify these arrangements, chemists use a three-dimensional lattice to encompass the smallest repeat unit, known as the unit cell, of the crystal structure. There is really a lot of math involved, but we can explain it visually. A unit cell is really just a tiny box containing some atoms or molecules. We draw the edges of this small box so that if you were to line up lots of identical copies of this box in all directions, you would get the structure of the entire crystal lattice.
How dense is mercury compared to other liquids?
The density of liquid mercury, it is a liquid at room temperature, is about 5.43 g/ml. This is about 5.5 times as heavy as water. One of the next most dense liquids is bromine with a density of 3.03 g/ml. But mercury remains almost twice as dense.